Hello and welcome to the 8th and last episode of History Bubble, Armenia. Last episode we saw the end of the Soviet Union, and with it Armenia got its independence. But while the Union was dissolving, the large Armenian population of the Azerbaijani-controlled Nagorno-Karabakh protested for their unification with Armenia. This soon escalated to mass deportations and migrations of Armenians and Azeris to their respective countries. Many massacres also took place, and a small fighting started between the two countries. By now, in the later 1991, it was almost a full-scale war. As the Union was dissolving, there came a period of relative small-scale conflict and large amount of preparation for the coming war. Both sides started buying weapons and armored vehicles from black markets, selling former USSR weaponry. The consolidation of armies also started with mass conscriptions, as well as many volunteers started to make up the armies of the two nations. After this consolidation of forces, the Azerbaijanis had a clear advantage in almost every field, from military personnel, artillery and aircraft. The biggest advantage the Armenian had was their experience, since roughly 60% of the soldiers had served in Afghanistan, while the Azeris had often suffered discrimination in the Soviet army and did not have many of their men who had served as fighters in the Soviet army. But he still had gotten something out of Afghanistan in the form of an ally, Gulbuddin Ekmaitar and his Hezab-e-Islami. Fighting soon started to escalate in the borders of the two nations and in Nagorno-Karabakh. With this fighting, many Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh fled to the area's largest city, Stepanakert. But this city was soon surrounded by Azeri forces located in the nearby towns of Shusha and Koyali. During the siege, massive bombardments were directed at the city in hopes of its surrender. But this did not happen, and hundreds of civilians died during the siege, and the city lay in ruins. To try to save the city, Armenian Karabakh army and tried to capture the town of Koyali and sent an ultimatum to the town, saying that we will capture it if the shelling did not stop. But as this did not stop the shelling, the Armenians, who had control over most of the surrounding areas, launched their offensive. After a short amount of fighting, the Armenians emerged victorious, and both civilians and defenders tried to flee the town through a mountain corridor. The Armenians had stated that we would let them escape, but the pursuing attackers followed them and massacred both civilians and defenders. Over 200 civilians were estimated to have been killed, as well as many fleeing defenders. To truly end the siege of Stepanakert, the Armenians needed to capture the town of Shusha as the last Azerbaijani stronghold in the region. So an offensive was launched by the Armenians. They surrounded the city and started to attack, but even when outnumbered, the Armenians managed to get their enemies to flee and the city was captured. Soon after, the Karabakh soldier captured the town of Lachin, which connected Armenia with Nagorno-Karabakh, allowing them to send more troops and supply to the region. The Armenians now had control of most of Nagorno-Karabakh, and in response to this, Azerbaijan planned a large counter-offensive. This offensive proved fairly successful, as Azerbaijani at first quite easily captured parts of northern and eastern Nagorno-Karabakh. They continued to advance, but the further they got, they encountered more and more resistance from the Armenians, especially when they came to the large mountain, where the Armenians could easily harass them with relatively little danger to themselves. But Azerbaijanis had still conquered about 50% of Nagorno-Karabakh. Artsakh now called a state of emergency and issued a more general conscription for men between ages of 18 and 40 and women with previous military experience. And with these new soldiers and a large aerial attack, the offensive came to a halt. They were also helped by the increasing support from Russia. The Russians may even have given them aerial support, but this is disputed. With the Azerbaijanis exhausted after a long offensive and Artsakh stronger than ever, Azerbaijan retreated and Armenia captured almost all of their lost territory. Later, Azerbaijan planned a smaller offensive, but because of the effectiveness of Armenian anti-tank weapons, close encounters of cities and towns, the Azeri tanks were decimated and the offensive lost. As winter came, the offensive came to a halt, and the bleak economic situation became worse, especially for Armenia, which had both food and power shortages. But with the help of the Armenian diaspora and other countries, they got the needed supplies. As winter came to a close, Armenia started a new wave of offensives into northern Karabakh, capturing some few remaining Azerbaijani-controlled towns in Nagorno-Karabakh. With Nagorno-Karabakh mostly secured, the Armenians hoped to connect more of Armenia with the region, so launched an offensive to do so. And with advances from both sides, the Azeri were overrun, and Armenians captured large parts of the territory, splitting Armenia and Artsakh. But Azerbaijan was also facing some internal struggles, as one of the major generals of the war set out to overthrow the government, and successfully did so. This created chaos in the nation, which Armenia used to continue their advance, both inside and outside Nagorno-Karabakh. In response, Azerbaijan launched several counteroffensives that resulted in very little gain but death, as most gains were retaken soon after they had been gained. They became more and more desperate, sending out poorly trained boys at age 16 and made winter offensives where they lost 10 times as many as the Armenians. After these offensives, all parties wanted to end hostilities, so a ceasefire was signed. This means although on paper part Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh and other Armenian occupied areas is under control of the unrecognized Republic of Artsakh, which is an independent state in almost all but name. As the war came to a close, Turkey and Azerbaijan still held a blockade against Armenia, and the Dashnaks were banned from being allowed in elections and even jailed for having foreign leaders. Soon, before the shift of millennia, a parliament shooting occurred in Armenia, killing 8. Some even say the president was behind it, trying to rid himself of opponents. During the next election, this same president was accused of fraud because of his arrest of prominent opposition supporters. Ever since the end of the Nagorno-Karabakh war, a discussion has been had for a more permanent solution, but no agreement has come. In 2008, a new president was elected, Serge Sargsyan, but the opposition claimed that he had won by fraud, and massive protests commenced, which were violently put down. But this only made the protest larger, and police fled the scene, and the army was put in its place, and the resulting skirmishes ended with 10 dead. The relations with Turkey also started to become better under his presidency. In 2016, relatively large clashes occurred between Armenia and Azerbaijan as a result of the Azerbaijani need to pressure Armenia into forming an agreement to the conflict, as the current status quo is advantageous to them, and thus no agreement can be reached if nothing is to be done about it. And the clashes resulted in small gains for Azerbaijan, and over 100 people died. And with that, after half a year, the history of Armenia will finally have been covered by this channel, and the next country I will cover will be Australia, which hopefully will not take as long. So I hope you will join me for that as well.